Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode in a series on contemporary Western philosophers. Last time we took a look at Heidegger's philosophy of being and world. Today we'll take a look at Heidegger's philosophy of man. So, when we speak about Heidegger's philosophy of man, first and foremost, we need to take a look at the concepts of Dasein, der Mann, and das Mann. Now, Heidegger's philosophy is centered around the question of being. However, he says that being doesn't reveal itself directly. It must be explored through beings that exist. In other words, it must be explored through the individual things that exist. And the best being to explore this question is none other than the human beings. Why? Because we are the only creatures that are conscious of our own existence, and we are also capable of questioning our existence. Now, to emphasize this unique characteristic of humans, Heidegger uses the term Dasein, which means there being or being there. Now, this term highlights that human existence is not just about living, but it is about being aware of existence itself. We are always engaged in understanding our own being and the being of the world around us. However, Heidegger will say that human existence is not isolated. We live in societies, and this social life can sometimes prevent us from truly questioning our being. Hence, we see that Heidegger makes a distinction between the two ways of living. Why? Because he says that in the way we live in societies, this can sometimes prevent us from truly questioning our being. Hence, he will speak firstly about the authentic existence. Here we see that this refers to a person who takes responsibility for their own existence, who actively questions their being, and who makes choices based on personal conviction. So, for example, here we see a person who chooses his career based on deep reflection, based on the skills that they have, interests, and purpose in life. So the person here doesn't choose a career just because of force or pressure, but because they really have reflected on it. They are convinced of what they are choosing. Inauthentic existence, on the other hand, refers to a person who follows societal norms without questioning them. And in this way, the people live based on only what one is supposed to do. That means they adopt options, behaviors, and values because they are expected rather than because they are deeply considered. So here we see that a person becomes a doctor simply because the family expects it. So because of family pressure, because of societal pressure, when people take decisions, this refers to the person who is living an inauthentic life according to Heidegger. So ultimately, this is a life where people live without questioning if it aligns. So if the choice that they make aligns with their true calling. For example, you want to become a photographer, and that is really where your passion, where your interests lie. But because of family pressure, because of societal pressure, you choose and become a doctor or a lawyer. That would in a way indicate inauthentic existence according to Heidegger. Now this distinction is important because Heidegger believes that we must strive to live authentically, which means we must question our existence instead of blindly following what society dictates. And here he will speak about man as caretaker or man as shepherd. Now, Heidegger describes human beings as caretakers or shepherds of being. Now, this means that we are not just passive observers of existence, but we are actively responsible for understanding and preserving it. And therefore, the German word Sorge, which means care, is important to this idea. Because in Heidegger's philosophy, care is not just about worrying or feeling responsible. It is about deeply engaging in the world and with others around us. And therefore, this engagement will include nurturing relationships, that is, caring for other people. It will include preserving knowledge, that is, understanding and questioning being. It will also mean interacting meaningfully with the world, that is, not just living but actively shaping existence. For example, a teacher who deeply cares about their students' learning does not just teach because it is a job. They nurture understanding, they guide students to think critically and help them to discover knowledge. In this sense, they are a shepherd of wisdom, guiding others towards deeper insights. And this idea of care also connects to Heidegger's hermeneutical circle, which means that in order to understand something deeply, we must already have a sense of it. So, to understand something deeply, you must have some sense of it. So this is his concept of hermeneutical circle. Now, this applies to being. We can only question being because we already have some vague awareness about it. And this cycle of questioning and discovering is fundamental to human existence. Next, Heidegger will speak about man as thrownness. So, this means that we do not choose the circumstances that we are born into. For example, we simply find ourselves already in the world. You did not choose your family, your country, your culture, or even the time in the history in which you were born. You were simply thrown into these conditions without any prior consent. So nobody asked you where you wanted to be born or in which family, which country, etc. For example, we see a child born in a wealthy family will experience life differently from a child born in poverty. Both children, however, have no say in their initial conditions. And therefore, being thrown into the world means that we do not have a clear understanding of where we come from in the ultimate sense. But once we are here, we must navigate life, interpret our reality, and make choices about our future. And this idea also connects to another Heideggerian concept of Mitsein, that is, being with others. So, Heidegger says that humans do not live in isolation. We are part of societies, families, and communities. Now, he says that this social existence can be both a help as well as a hindrance. It helps because we rely on others for knowledge, support, cooperation. It hinders, or it becomes a hindrance, because it, in a way, tempts us to conform to anonymous social norms that tell us how to think, act, and live without questioning. For example, a person might adopt certain religious or political beliefs not because they truly understand and believe them, but because it is what their society expects. And hence, instead of questioning their life purpose, a person might simply follow the expected path, that is, study, get a job, marry, have children, and retire, without even reflecting on whether this is meaningful for them personally. Thus, we see that Heidegger urges everyone to confront our thrownness and to take responsibility for shaping our existence rather than passively accepting what society dictates. The next concept that Heidegger speaks about is man and death. And he says that one of the most important realities that in a way shapes human existence is death. And therefore he describes death as the possibility that annihilates all other possibilities. Now, what does this mean? In life, we have many possibilities. We can choose a career, we can form relationships, we can travel, we can explore the world, etc. In all these things, there is some level of uncertainty when what will happen or how will it happen, etc. But he says that death is one certainty. It is the final possibility that makes all other choices temporary. Now, whether you will go on a boat cruise or whether you will travel to the US or to any other part of the world may not be as certain. But one thing is certain, that you will die. Okay, and this final possibility makes all the other choices of us temporary, because that is one permanent thing that happens is death. So against death, everything else becomes temporary. And he says that this awareness of death creates a deep existential feeling of dread or angst. Now again he says that there are two choices how we can respond to death. First is avoidance, which in a way will indicate inauthentic existence. And he says that many people distract themselves from thinking about death by focusing on daily routines, entertainment, and social expectations. So here he says that they immerse themselves in Dasein, that is, living according to what society expects rather than confronting their morality. So For example, someone who fulfills their life with work, social status, and material possessions never questions the deeper meaning of their existence. On the other hand, we see that we have acceptance. You can accept the reality of death. And this indicates authentic existence. Why? Because people can choose to live fully in the awareness that death will come at some time or the other. Instead of fearing death, instead of running away of death, instead of distracting oneself from thinking about death as people do in the inauthentic existence, he says that in authentic existence, people can choose to live fully, knowing that one day we will die, everything on this earth is temporary. And this means we make intentional choices, realizing that life is finite, that life is not permanent. And here we, in a way, embrace responsibility for one's own path. That means you take responsibility for your own decisions. For example, a person who, knowing that they will one day die, chooses to live meaningfully, pursuing passion, helping others, and valuing their time deeply. However, we see that Heidegger argues that to live authentically, we must accept our finiteness, we must embrace our personal responsibility, and we must live with a deep awareness of our mortality. And then Heidegger brings the question of man and time. Now, Heidegger will say that human existence is closely tied to time. And therefore, he explains that care or Sorge has three dimensions which are all related to time. Now, which are they? First, he will speak about the future, self-projection. Human beings always orient themselves toward the future. So we plan, we hope, we set goals. Now, our existence here is about becoming something rather than simply being static. So, for example, a student we see may study hard not for the present but for their future career because they want to become something in life. Next concept or next dimension which Heidegger speaks is the past. Here we are in a way born into a world we did not choose. Okay, so we are born into a world with history, traditions, and cultural influences that we did not choose. And he says that the past shapes us, but we must decide how to relate to it. For example, a person born in a religious family may either embrace or reject that faith, but they cannot erase the fact that they were born into it. And the third dimension which Heidegger speaks about is the present. We live in the here and now, interacting with people and using tools to shape the world. But everything in the world, Heidegger says, appears to us in relation to how we use it. For example, a chair in terms of sitting, car in terms of driving. For example, he will say a farmer sees the land as something to cultivate, whether a painting or a painter might see it as a subject of painting. And therefore, Heidegger will speak about time as the horizon of being. He says, since all human experience is shaped by time, Heidegger suggests that time itself might be the key of understanding being. So, since everything in our life is shaped by time, he says time itself might be something that helps us to understand being. And therefore, he quotes by saying that if human existence is fundamentally structured by time, could time itself be the lens through which we understand what it means to be at all? So can time help us to understand what it means to be? And we may ask, what does all this mean to us? So in a way, we see that Heidegger's ideas challenge us to reflect on our lives. He says we are thrown into the world without choice, so in that way we must shape our own path. We are finite beings, and our awareness of death should push us to live meaningfully. We must experience life through time, and our past, future and present are all interconnected. And therefore he wants us to live authentically, and we can do this by accepting our thrownness. And in this way, we must not be passive in life, but we must always be actively searching for meaning in life. Next, he says, face death and live with intention and meaning. And ultimately, he says that recognize that time shapes our being, and therefore, he invites all of us to make conscious choices about our future. So, he says that we need to start living as ourselves, living meaningfully. So this is all for this episode on Heidegger's philosophy of man. Next time around, we'll take a look at Heidegger's philosophy of God. So till then, see you next time.